welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited for today's video. I'm finally bringing you my Q1 palette roundup. This is coming 3 to 4 weeks late. Like, this should have been filmed like April 1st once we hit the three month mark. I did this last year, and essentially I've tracked every single time I reach into a palette, even for one shade, and I come back every 3 months to share with you my most used palettes, how many times I've used my palettes, etc. I used to do where I decluttered any palettes I hadn't used in the last 3 months, but we're not doing that anymore. We'll get into how many unused palettes I had though. It was a lot. I did decide this year that I really wanted to make palette content like an even bigger thing on my channel, which meant that at the beginning of the year I went buck wild and purchased a ton of palettes that I was trying to get through and review, and it has proven to not have been my best decision. I made quite a few bad decisions in my life, and this is one of the not better ones, because it's meant a lot of my other palettes have been neglected. So we're gonna get into all of the data. If you are interested, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, or you just like to chit chat about makeup, I would love if you would consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's just jump into the video. Last year, I tracked a little bit differently in that I had number categories. I think no use to 3 uses, 3 uses, possibly to 5 uses, 5 to 10, 11 to whatever. This year I've decided to keep it a little bit more simple, and I've kept it to 4 number categories. I'm referencing my notes here. So I have 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 19, and then 20 plus. Currently I have, to my best knowledge, 129 palettes in my collection. That does include my quads, etc. And I had a total of 52 palettes that I did not reach into one time. One time, not even one time in the past 3 months, which means that in the past 3 months, 40% of my eyeshadow palette collection has gone unused. So this was very eye-opening to me, and I will give just a little bit of a preface here saying that, again, I brought in a ton of palettes into my collection at the beginning of the year, and I will say since February, I've been very inconsistent with wearing makeup. Last year it was like consistently at least 5 days a week. Unless it was like a very off week, I would wear makeup at least 5 days. Now it's been 3 days a week, 4 days a week if it's like a good week. And by good week I mean a week where like I enjoy doing my makeup. There's just, it's been really inconsistent in terms of the amount of times I've been wearing my makeup over the course of the last 3 months, which is part of the reason why I'm thinking we're seeing lower usage, but I also still have a very large palette collection, which I'm comfortable with. I love eyeshadow. I am a very creative person, but not a good artist, and doing my makeup, specifically my eyeshadow, is like a way for me to just like be creative, even if it's just like a neutral eye look. So I am okay with having a large eyeshadow palette collection. I'm totally fine with that. However, I don't want my eyeshadows to just sit in my collection and never get touched. That being said, I did use a total of 77 palettes, so reached into the palette for at least one shade one time, which was obviously 60% of my collection did get used. I'm noticing I want a little bit more. A lip gloss. So I have 2 eyeshadow palettes that I used 20 or more times, 2 eyeshadow palettes that I used anywhere between 11 times and 19 times, and then I have 12 eyeshadow palettes that I used anywhere from 6 to 10 times. And we're gonna go through those palettes right now. Everything else, any other palette that you know that I have in my collection, which I'll leave my most recent eyeshadow palette collection linked below, but I will say my eyeshadow palette collection has grown pretty significantly since then. But any other palette that I do not mention today was used either not at all or anywhere between, well, 0 to 5 times. So that being said, let's jump into the 6 to 10 category, starting with the one that I have on top. This is my Pat McGrath Subliminal palette, and I have reached into this a total of 10 times. Now I will say that this is going in my Pan Those eyeshadows as well as my whole collection. I think this was a double dipper type of a palette, but I've reached for this 10 times, again, in any capacity. It could be one shade, it could be I created a whole look from it. I don't necessarily track how I used the palette, Then we have my Nabla Side by Side palette, and I will say I have reached for this a ton since April 1st. So as I'm sharing this data with you, I did make the cutoff March 31st, and anything that I've used or any of my uses since March 31st will be tracked for the next quarterly update. I've used this a ton lately, but in the first 3 months of the year, I reached for this a total of 9 times. I really enjoy this palette. I like that it is mostly neutrals, but like can lean warm or cool. And I've been using this a ton to try and pair it with my ColourPop glass bowl. I've been having fun doing a lot of mixing and matching with this palette and then popping that on the lid because I am currently trying to pan that shadow. But I did reach for this 9 times the first 3 months of the year. And then I have my I have two palettes from Lunar Beauty. I almost said Lunar Eclipse because this is the Eternal Eclipse palette. But I reached for both of these 8 times. So we have the Eternal Eclipse palette, which looks like this. I really enjoy this palette, especially for the mattes. But once I finished testing this for my review, I kind of put it away because then I was trying to test new palettes. So I am really excited to hopefully bring less palettes into my collection and feel less pressure on myself. The only pressure that is created is by myself to review more palettes, but I'm excited to just start to use my collection more. I think this second half of the year, I really want to focus on maybe palette content using palettes I already own rather than bringing new palettes in and reviewing them. I mean, I want to bring new palettes in, but I don't need to bring every palette that's ever been created into my collection. And then I also have the Greek Goddess palette, which I really enjoyed too. I got this at the end of the year. I was like, I may have used this a little bit at the very end of 2020 as well, but those wouldn't have been included in the 8 times that I used this. Very beautiful palette. I'm a huge fan of this one as well. Next up, I have the Club Nebula palette, and I have reached for this a total of 8 times. I am a huge fan of this, but this is a palette that is so colorful, so I really only reach for this on days that I am off of work. I can't say there's ever been a time I've reached for this going to work, just because I don't feel like people would accept me with colorful eyeshadow at work. I don't know if it would be accepted, but that's okay. I have really loved this palette and had a ton of fun playing around with this palette on the days that I do not work, and I cannot wait to get some more use out of this. I would be interested in owning all of the Kaleidos palettes. I will say that. Next up, I have the Artemis Alter Ego palette. This is one I want to say I got towards the end of 2022 and may have had some uses in 2020, but I've used this a total of 9 times in 2021. I love this palette. I was so impressed when I got this palette. I'm not gonna lie, when I ordered it, I was not expecting much. I was just like, I know it's like a dupe brand. I feel like the packaging is gonna be cheap. We'll see about the quality. The packaging is so nice on this. Like, this is hefty. It comes with a really nice mirror. And for the most part, I really enjoy the formula on most of these shadows. I will say that there are some matte shadows in here that are more like creamy in texture, almost like a ColourPop Super Shock. I don't hate them, but they're not my favorite. But for the most part, I really love having this palette. I love the shimmers in here. The shimmer formula is so good. So I've been really happy with that. My ABH Jackie palette, I've used this a total of 7 times. This is a palette that I love. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection, but I feel like it's a palette that I often neglect because I'm worried I'm gonna finish it up or I'm gonna use up a shade that I love and then I can't get it anymore because it was limited edition. So there's definitely been a lot of times throughout this palette's life with me that I have chosen not to use this just because it's like that weird anxiety you get when you're like, but I was really happy to reach for this 7 times. This is also currently going in my current pan those eyeshadows, so this will get even more use and love this year, which I am really excited about. Also, my Sultry palette, I have reached for this a total of 10 times. This has a couple of shades that have been in my pan those eyeshadows, so realistically I should have reached for this more than 10 times, but again, trying to test new things, not doing my makeup as often. I do love this palette though. This might be my second favorite ABH palette. I think this one I like more than the Soft Glam now, which is crazy because Soft Glam used to be my favorite, but I do love this palette. This is still currently going in my pan those eyeshadows, so I'm still actively working on it and I cannot wait to get some more use out of that. And then the final palette My Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette, I have really been enjoying this one as well. I have reached for this one 7 times so far, and I feel like some of these I'm like, did I actually track every use? Because there was a period of time where I was reaching into this every day, so 7 doesn't seem right, but that's what I have tracked, so that's what we're going with. I was taken aback by this palette. I was nervous to order this because I was not a huge fan of the ultraviolet palette, and I was like, you know, this side of the palette just kind of seems like boring, like I already have this in my collection. Do I really reach for blues that often? Probably not. Do I need this palette? Probably not. I'm so glad that I got this. This has so much more range to it than you'd think. Like, I have done warm looks, cool looks. It's a beautiful palette, and I'm really happy to have this. If you are on the fence about this, I would recommend diving a little bit deeper and really considering this one, because I've been so impressed with that. My Artist Couture Supreme Nudes. Now, I know I use this a lot at the end of 2020, and I have reached for this another 9 times in 2021. I love this palette. This palette will be going traveling with me if we travel in 2021, just because it's such a perfect palette for travel. I love how sleek it is. I love the formula. I am just such a big fan of this one. And then I have these 2 Nabla Cutie palettes as my last 2 in this category. Both of these I reached for, sorry, no, this one I reached for a total of 10 times. This is the Nabla Cutie Nude palette. Not my favorite of the Cutie palettes, just because the formulas in this, like I'm not a huge fan of the, I don't know what they call this, possibly like the latex formula. It's like a more crumbly matte. It's just not my favorite. It takes a little bit more effort to work with, but I am a huge fan of the Nabla Cutie Platinum, and I reached for this a total of 6 times the last 3 months. So I have a feeling this is one that I will reach for a lot come the fall winter time again. So this is beautiful. I love this palette. Reached for that 6 times. Okay, let's get into the 11 to 19 category. So I have 2 in this category. The first one being the Juvia's Nomad palette. And I actually have a pan in this palette. I think you guys wouldn't have seen this yet. This is a very recent pan. I hit this, I think, 3 days ago. I have been using this in my brows. I will say, I do like to find like a dark brown in my palettes that I will use in my brows until I hit pan, and then I'll move on. So I did get a lot of use out of this because I was reaching for it for my brows, but I really love this palette, and I can't wait to reach for this more in the fall time. So again, I reached for that, if I did not say, I believe 15 times. And then the ABH Subculture palette, I reached for a total of 18 times, and I have 3 pans currently going in this palette. So this is a palette that I currently have in a series on my channel that I'm doing. I think I called it Palette Summer Last Hurrah. I filmed it in January, and I can't speak. I'm going to do an update soon because I think there's a couple palettes I am actually going to declutter early, but there's a couple more palettes I might roll into the Palettes on their Last Hurrah. And it's essentially older palettes in my collection that I want to just use and love this year and then declutter them because either they're getting old or like I just don't love them like I used to. And I actually am really glad that I ended up putting this palette in that series because right away in the beginning of the year, it made me think a little bit differently about how I could get some use out of this palette before I decluttered it. And I use these 2 shades in my brows as well as in my hairline to try and fill in some of my like balding spots because I wear a tight ponytail. Not good. Anyway, this has worked really well for that, and I anticipate I will have a lot more use on this before the year's end. So then we move into the 20 plus category, and up first I'll share this one because this one has less. This is 22 uses on my Urban Decay Born to Run palette. This is another one that I was using for my brows. I was using this shade right here, which actually is a little bit warmer than I prefer, but I was able to hit pan on this, and this is another palette that I included in my Palettes on their Last Hurrah. I will say, since putting this in that series and using this 22 times the last 3 months, I'm not sure I'll end up decluttering this one at the end of the year. It reminded me that I do really enjoy this palette specifically for some of these like warmer brown shades. I love the shade Blaze, and I think I could do a lot more work on this palette and hit a lot more pan. So I'm not sure I'll declutter this one by the end of the year, but I anticipate I again will have a lot more use on this one before the year's over. And then the most used palette from the last 3 months is my Too Faced Palm Springs palette. I used this palette 36 times, and I believe all 36 of those times were to hit pan on this lid setting shade in the shade Cabana Time. Yeah, how exciting, right? Yeah, 36 times, all for this shade. So I feel like this was not that exciting of an update, and I'm really excited to hopefully have more to share in next quarter's update. I'm hoping I'll have more palette usage to share, more palettes in like the 11 to 19 category, but I always love to come share kind of the data with you. I am like a statistics nerd. I also love algebra. I just love numbers. So this video is one of my favorites to film, and I just think it's so fun. If you guys track your palette usage, I would love to know in the comments below what is your most used palette, or even if you don't track, what do you think is your most used palette? I would love to know. I'm excited to see what next quarter's most used palette will be, and whether or not it will be something that was like used for lid setting shade, eyebrows, or was it actually just used for fun. But that is gonna wrap it up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting my channel as you always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.